Thank you, Professor Waters. We're already running out of time, but I have one question each to each of the speaker from the House. One each to Professor Das, Dr. Shangamitra, and Professor Waters. It seems. Who's there? Ashish. Identify yourself.
So I just have a suggestion. If all the premier institutes can have a system where they can call the faculty of the smaller institute to come and take up a teaching assignment for 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, or 6 months, and so on. And similarly, vice versa, can send their faculty to the smaller institutes. So probably that is going to be great help for the small, upcoming institutes. So I just want to check up the, viewpoint of Professor Das on this. Thank you.
I don't think that's a very feasible solution, feasible way of doing it, because schools have their own agenda and their own programs and their own faculties they have handpicked themselves. I think what's more important is the professional bodies organizing, as was mentioned earlier by some speakers, maybe by Chetan, is that career improvement programs and faculty training or faculty workshops is a better means of doing it. And the point is that this could be done anywhere. I mean, I'll just give you sorry to digress into something which I'm quite keen to mention. I'm just setting up, for example, Habitat Urban Transformation Lab. The idea of the lab is just a room that you have to pass through between practice and theory, between academia and practice. The whole idea here is that redefine urban practice. What is practice? Practice is not necessarily producing buildings only. Practice could be to deal with public spaces. Practice could be applying research on the ground. So I think academia has to, as Professor Waters just said, that research, I mean, he was talking about research having local specificity and strongly rooted in the context and the environment that you're dealing with, something you understand. It's almost like, you ask a class 2 student in a school to draw a windmill. He'll draw a horrible windmill because he has never lived in the environment of windmills. But you ask him to draw a cow, he might draw it very well. So what I'm saying is that the schools could organize these programs, but I don't think it's a feasible solution to kind of interject into the school's own programs so easily. So I don't.
On this mentoring thing, I can tell you that in an organized setup, like SPA has mentored Bhopal and Vijayawada to come up, and with the SPA Act now, like all these new IITs which has now been in position, they were mentored by, say, IIT Delhi mentored somebody, IIT Kharagpur mentored somebody. So some of the older institutions mentored 2-3 institutes together. So I think the concept must percolate down, need not necessarily be only with the SPA, but with the private institutions also.
And I also want to mention the point I mentioned earlier. It's very important for any school to pick up a couple of mentors, like chairs. They don't fit into the hierarchy of the Council of Architecture demands, but rather they come in as a lateral player to inspire the school.
I find Nilanjan asking and some other. First Nilanjan Bhawal and then you.
Okay, thank you, Abhijit Da. You already introduced me. I'm Nilanjan Bhawal, from practicing architect from Delhi. I would like to thank all the 3 presenters for their very nice presentations. And the aspect that I would like to touch upon is that Professor Das very nicely elaborated the professional inputs in education, while Professor Basu talked about the academic part and Professor Waters elaborated the research inputs. What I feel is these 3 form a holy trinity in architectural education. So my question would be to any of the panelists, how to integrate these 3 aspects, the profession, the academics, and the research, to bring forward positive inputs in architectural education.
Your question is that how research, academics, and the practice can be combined in the architectural education. I think I mentioned that what we do is that we have a research component because there is a PhD program, and even in the course that there is a research component, like the final year thesis is divided into two components, project 1 and project 2. Project 1 is the research component, which is the culmination, but it goes on. And the postgraduate research also takes part in or helps in that. The teachers themselves are involved in the practice. The teachers themselves are involved in the practice, and many of the projects, they involve the students also in the practice. So there is the thing. Many of the ongoing projects, they're there. And research, academics, and this is how we try to integrate. I think it has worked out quite well, working out quite well.
Professor Wattas, would you like to elaborate on this a bit? The confluence of all the three in one place.
Is it working? Can I be heard? Yeah. You know, I would just say one thing, that actually the confluence is there in most of the established colleges. You have the core faculty, you have some kind of, research cluster or a research cell, and then there is a visiting faculty, and it's worked very well in the older institutions. I think we have the problem because the professional also likes to engage with the student, the young mind, thesis. It's all happening. The short answer is, we are baffled by the mushrooming of colleges in distant areas. And it's very difficult to invite. You can, with your network, with your connections, like Anil from Moorthal, he's such a good host that besides, coming to Moorthal for teaching and interaction, he will open the single malt and then you always come. And what I'm saying that you do build up relationships. We are not in the Cows and Buffalo colleges are not in Timbuktu. They are reachable by road. It can happen. The problem with the private institutions, they are run by sweet makers and erstwhile, mithai makers or something. They will not pay. They will not pay for it. Who stops you from inviting Rajwal? I offered to get in my institution. They say, how much money we are spending and what is the trade-off? That is, let's be very honest, it's a very frank get-together in-house. पैसे कौन देगा? अगर आप मना सकते हो लाला जी को तो बहुत अच्छा.
Yeah, one only. Please.
Before I hand over the mic, I'm just stealing this mic for a moment. I'm Ashutosh Agrawal. I congratulate Professor Das, Professor Sangamitra, and Professor Watts from speaking from their heart. And in fact, I'm provoked to speak something unspeakable here. There are issues related to studio that we are talking about, relevance of studio in architecture teaching. Then we are talking about focusing our discussion on colleges which are in remote locations where we don't get the faculty and where we have the keen students. But I'm witness to many situations where there are 4 teachers walking in a studio with 7 students present with a batch of 60. And you spoke about the promoter of the college, the role of the promoter of the college. He wants the college to be the number 1. And they are number 1, indeed. So what to do about all these things? Pertinent. And promoters are not going to stop from opening new colleges.
Request S.K. Das to give a very brief reply to this thing.
One of the points which actually I wanted to mention, and I thought it is too cut off from the current topic of dealing with the bachelor's course, is this whole idea that I think the bachelor's course needs to be broken up. I think there could be a 3 years program, like a 3 years BA, Bachelor of Arts in architecture. And the BA course, I mean, these examples exist elsewhere in the world where they're not allowed to practice, but they've got a bachelor's degree. It's like the liberal arts tradition in the US or some of the schools in UK who give a BA degree. So with that you can do a MA, you can go further into studying and working in an office, but you can't practice. And then there's a BArch, which is what we have. And I think BArch could be a little bit extended to do a dual degree of integrated BArch and MArch, which could be something like 6 years program. If it's not from the very beginning, it can structure itself in that direction as such. And the other thing is that, you know, in terms of, the question was about the number of students. I don't think any school, I mean really, I think it's obscene to have a school with 160 students. So no, you have 60. What I'm saying that the council does licenses for 160 students to schools. I've been to a number of schools where it's such a pathetic situation that they're sitting there, they don't even know how to decide on a thesis topic for the students. 160 topics in a small place, you know. And it's just overloading the teachers. You don't allowing the teachers to develop themselves, allowing them to think, allowing them to research. You're just loading them with quantitative pressure of number of subjects, number of students, hours. You know, I mean, I think when I was in Susant, I think we made it that a lecturer will have only 21 hours of working time with students. It was scandalous. And an assistant professor, Anjali, was what, 17 or 16 hours, and a professor 12 hours. And believe me, it worked very well. And the faculty was very happy. They produced some work, they practiced also. And I don't think the program suffered. It's a whole question about really reworking it out.
I think, end of the day, perhaps it will be survival of the best. The worst one will peter out in due course of time when the market forces will drive them out. Your question, please.
Hello, good morning, everybody. And my question is to Professor Rajneesh Vattas. To introduce myself, I'm an architect B.D. Sharma, practicing in Delhi. And I again introduce myself, my pursuit to reading to study and habits. I continued my education in various institutes. And as on date also, I'm a student in IIT Delhi. Now I pose my question. Looking into IIT Delhi system, how they pursue and how they take up the research. Normally in this kind of institution, there is a very small, brief, single line statement of the research, which is as a concept derived, and they continue on the research. And coming to the architecture education, we see a lot of students coming to us for the training, and we see their theses. Those theses are built on, they just want to swallow everything in one project. Thesis about a school, a college, normal traditional building. The student want to show up that, look, he can make a building, he is employable. Whereas my proposition is, the professor continued the research subject. Research is normally focused on particular item or agenda. Our architecture education, nowadays we have around, I don't know, 10,000 or so students studying colleges.
Are you posing a question or you are giving some answer yourself?
I'm posing question.
Please, brief.
Now our theses, the graduate students are doing, are not useful to the practitioners. We don't find many alternative, many researches on stairs, on doors, on the subjects. We are depending on the historical documents, which are by Le Corbusier or somebody, that passed back. Nowadays there are a lot of technologies, and there are not a lot of things coming up, but our students are not taking up these subjects as a thesis. Please.
My very short answer will be that at the BArch level, to expect from the thesis any substantial research is not at all appropriate. Neither is it possible. You see, what can happen is that if there is in the schools, I've seen in many schools, prestigious schools, they always have a research cluster. They have some core faculty, they have some interested professional or visiting faculty, and an outside person who can just, very good in the cluster or the research cell. They are the ones who drive the engine of architectural inquiry. And it percolates down to the student at the level of asking the right questions. To expect BArch level, if my BArch level thesis, Jawala was the examiner, if it is to be shown today to all of you, you'll give me 2 out of 10. But I passed. So BArch level pe nahi hoti. It is only at the PH masters, but research culture, research clusters, research cell, whatever you want to call it, is a must in every institution.
Last question from the lady, perhaps, with little gender
Thank you.
preference.
Sometimes you get the benefit of being a lady. Okay, I'm Professor Tikku. I missed the earlier ones, but I did hear Professor Watt's paper. I think it was very interesting the way you placed research in the context of the profession and the way, architects, practicing architects, and even students in the schools of architecture, in their studios, research is a very important component of the design program, whether it's the first, second, third, and so on. So it should be an element in the studio. And of course, I'm sure you must have mentioned that the studio is actually the laboratory of all design thinking. It's actually the incubator for design thought, whether you're in the first or in the final and so on. We do in the school have tried to work on the culture of research through seminars, dissertations, and through the studio programs. Now, what intrigues me is that the way we are looking at research in the present times, the kind of PhDs and so on, and where is all this research that has been done over time? Is it kept in the shelves in some library, or is it actually developing a physicality in architecture in the real world? So my question is, where do you think this research should lead us in the profession? It should be an integral part of design inquiry, as you mentioned, and I think even at this age, beyond 60, I'm still researching. And it has to come from within. There has to be an inquiry which has to actually culminate and into a certain kind of physicality in architecture. So my question is, do you see it as something that should translate into the physicality of architecture?
Very briefly, 1 minute from both of you, and then we conclude this session.
Yeah, I would say that the research, let us say the research consciousness, I won't even say in a formal way, the research consciousness in a school of architecture will lead both. There will be short time, immediate gains leading to physicality, as you said, and there would be some kind of ideas research. Very often we forget to connect the dots. There are patterns happening, when you start looking for, whether in your historical architecture paradigms or even within your vicinity, the way people make their, say, human settlements, jo chote kasbe hote hain. You find very interesting patterns of growth of the streets. Those are areas, those kind of things, if they're shared, they will set the base for the next levels. So both the things should be there parallel. There should be ideas research, there should be historical research, which discuss, like Rajawal based his Fatehpur at the Seychelles village, and so much of that thing on Jaisalmer and Fatehpur Sikri then became, the buzzwords. And they turned it into physicality. At the same time, they were their ideas also by themselves. So I would say that there's no contradiction. Both should exist.
Yeah, Sangamitra.
You are very right that in any architectural design studio, research is a basic component. It just develops over the years, and it's a very integral part. It has been there. But when you are talking about a formal research, if I take it as a PhD level, the basic idea is the knowledge generation. I'll give you an example. When you have to refer something, we always have a lot of reference sources from abroad. Like, for example, we are doing a research on the senior citizen. We have a lot of reference material from abroad. Now, I'm guiding one. So if you do it in an Indian context, is a formal research, PhD result, hopeful that it will throw some light on the needs and requirements of the senior citizens in Indian context. Okay, and a knowledge will be generated. So formal research, whether in history or science or anything, is the knowledge generation and also giving us. So there are various levels of research.
Professor Das wanted to say a last word on that, and then we conclude.
Just one sentence. I don't think we could limit the idea of research. You either have theoretical research or you have empirical research. It can be either. And what is relevant, what's not relevant also is debatable. For example, if suppose a student comes to you and says, I want to work on architecture, gender and sexuality, would you consider it relevant or not relevant? This all depends. I don't think we can limit it in any sense. It's knowledge generation, as I agree with you.